There's a 1998 Toyota Camry sitting in a fleet yard outside Nagoya with 412,000 miles on the original transmission, not rebuilt, not flushed 4 times a year, just running. The fluid is clean, the shifts are smooth, and if you didn't know the odometer reading, you'd think it was a rental car with 20,000 miles on it. The owner spent nothing on that transmission, not a single dollar on repairs. And the reason is a small button on the dashboard that most drivers have accidentally pressed at some point, seen a warning light come on, and immediately pressed again to make it go away. That instinct turn off the warning light, restore the status quo, is exactly what's been costing people transmissions for the past 30 years. I'm not going to tell you this is a new discovery. It isn't. Toyota's engineering teams built this function into their transmissions deliberately in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Fleet operators running high-mileage taxi fleets across Japan documented it in internal maintenance protocols long before most consumers ever heard of it. The engineers who designed these transmissions understood exactly what kills them, and they put a dedicated button on the dashboard as a direct countermeasure. It wasn't added as a convenience feature. It wasn't added for towing, the way most owners' manuals frame it. It was added because the people who built automatic transmissions understood that the way most people drive in a city is quietly, methodically destroying them. One unnecessary gear shift at a time. Toyota's internal durability documentation from that period described the overdrive lockout function as a transmission thermal management tool. Not a power feature. Not a performance option. A thermal management tool. They were thinking about heat from the beginning. You already know this reaction, you've seen it your whole life and just never connected it to a transmission. Think about a light switch in your house that gets flipped on and off 30 times in an hour. Not because you need the light 30 times, just because someone keeps walking in and out of the room. The mechanical contacts inside that switch wear differently than a switch that stays in one position. Heat builds up at each switching event. The mechanism gets microscopically looser with each cycle. A switch that flips 1,000 times a week fails in a year. The same switch that flips twice a day lasts decades. An automatic transmission in stop-and-go city driving does something almost identical. Every time the transmission shifts gears, it generates heat at the clutch packs. Not a dangerous amount in any single event, but in city traffic, that transmission can be cycling between third gear and overdrive dozens of times per mile. Up into the highest gear when you reach 35. Down when you brake for the light ahead. Back up when traffic clears. Down again at the intersection. Most drivers in urban traffic are putting their transmission through somewhere between 80 and 100 unnecessary overdrive cycles per hour of driving. Each one heats the fluid slightly. Each one puts stress on the clutch pack that engages overdrive. And in an automatic transmission, heat is the primary cause of failure. Not age. Not mileage by itself. Heat. Transmission fluid begins breaking down meaningfully at around 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Most people's transmissions in heavy city traffic are running fluid regularly above that threshold without ever knowing it. When transmission fluid breaks down under heat, it loses its ability to maintain a protective film between the metal surfaces inside the clutch packs. Metal starts touching metal at the microscopic level. Tiny particles of clutch material enter the fluid. The fluid gets darker. The shifts get slightly less crisp. Most drivers attribute that gradual softening to the car getting older. It's not age. It's accumulated heat. And the gear hunting in city traffic is where most of that heat gets generated. The reason you've never heard of this is honestly kind of annoying. The transmission repair industry in the United States generates over $15 billion annually. A rebuilt automatic transmission at a dealership or an independent shop runs anywhere from $1,500 to $4,000 depending on the vehicle. A transmission flush the preventive service shops recommend to slow down heat damage costs between $150 and $250, and most shops suggest it every 30,000 miles. That recurring service revenue assumes a certain rate of transmission wear. A button that prevents most of the heat cycling that makes the wear happen in the first place. Doesn't fit neatly into that picture. The engineers who designed the button understood the physics. The service economy understood the economics. And most drivers spent 3 decades pressing the button off by accident and calling it a day. Here's what the button is, where to find it, and how to use it. The button is called the overdrive button, sometimes labeled simply OD. On most Toyota vehicles from the early 90s through roughly the mid-2000s, the Camry, the Corolla, the 4Runner, the Tacoma, the Avalon, the Sienna, it sits on the end of the gear selector lever or at the base of it. On some models, it appears on the dashboard or center console. When you press it, a light illuminates in your instrument cluster that reads, "O-D off." And there it is, the thing that trips people up every single time. The light that comes on says off. It looks like something is wrong. It looks like a warning. Most drivers who stumble on it by accident see that light and press the button immediately to make it disappear. That's the exact opposite of what the engineers intended. The O-D-OFF light means the protection function is active. It means the transmission is being told to stay in its appropriate gear range instead of hunting up into overdrive every time you reach 35 miles per hour. Overdrive is the highest gear in an automatic transmission. It's designed for a specific use case: steady highway driving at 55 miles per hour or above, where the engine can run at low RPM and maintain a consistent pace without shifting. In that context, overdrive is efficient, smooth, and exactly right. But in city driving speeds under 40, constant braking and accelerating, traffic lights every quarter mile, overdrive becomes a liability. The transmission keeps reaching for its highest gear every time you briefly hit 35, then kicks down the moment you touch the brakes, then reaches back up as soon as speed returns. The clutch pack that engages overdrive is getting activated and released dozens of times per mile. Each activation generates heat. Each one adds a microscopic amount of wear. Pressing the O-D button once tells the transmission to hold in its lower operating range, stop the unnecessary hunting, and stay there until you explicitly tell it otherwise. The fluid runs cooler. The clutch pack gets a rest. The transmission does its job without fighting itself at every red light. So, let me just show you how to do it. When you're about to enter city driving, an urban area, a commercial strip with stoplights, a neighborhood, any situation where you know you'll be stopping and starting regularly, press the overdrive button once before you start moving or the moment you exit the highway. The O-D-OFF light appears. Leave it there. Drive normally. The car doesn't feel dramatically different. It might hold a slightly lower gear through corners, feel slightly more responsive on acceleration, because the transmission isn't trying to climb to its highest gear. That's normal. That's the protection working. When you return to open road and sustained speeds, a highway on-ramp, a long stretch above 50 miles per hour, press the button again. The light goes off. Overdrive comes back on. The transmission climbs to its highway gear and runs exactly as designed. 2 button presses. $0. Every single drive. And after a few weeks of using it, you'll notice the transmission has become a background thought rather than something you're ever quietly anxious about. That's what consistent thermal management feels like from the driver's seat. Nothing dramatic. Just a transmission that keeps behaving the way it should, for longer than it would have otherwise. There's a second application that Toyota's own fleet documentation covered specifically, and it's one most people never think about. Cold starts. When a transmission has been sitting overnight, especially in temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the fluid inside it is thick, viscous, and nowhere near operating temperature. The seals are slightly stiffer. The clutch pack materials haven't expanded to their running dimensions. Driving immediately at highway speed with overdrive enabled in a cold transmission means forcing the highest gear clutch pack through activation cycles before the fluid can protect it properly. Toyota's fleet maintenance guidelines from the early 1990s instructed commercial drivers to engage overdrive off for the first 3 to 5 minutes of cold weather starts. Let the fluid circulate. Let the transmission reach a stable operating temperature. Then enable overdrive and drive normally. A 1,994 Toyota Camry that a northern Japan fleet ran for over 380,000 miles without a transmission rebuild, used this cold start protocol on every single drive from October through April, for 11 years. When a technician finally inspected the transmission during a routine check, the clutch pack wear was consistent with a vehicle that had covered roughly 120,000 miles. Not 380,000. Here's the mistake that makes it fail. Drivers use the button correctly in the city, then merge onto the highway and forget the O-D-OFF light is still illuminated. At 65 miles per hour, with overdrive disabled, the engine is running 300 to 400 RPM higher than it should be. That's harder on the engine, noticeably worse on fuel economy, and isn't doing the transmission any particular favors either. The button is a city tool. It's a stop-and-go tool. When you're back on open road with clear distance ahead, turn overdrive back on, let the transmission climb to its highway gear, and drive normally. One honest limitation that belongs here. Not every vehicle has this specific button. Transmissions with 6, 8, and 10 forward speeds, which became common after the mid-2000s, handle gear selection logic differently, through software and adaptive shift control rather than a simple overdrive lockout. If your vehicle doesn't have an O/D button, look for a manual mode, a sport mode, or a hold function. Many vehicles that removed the dedicated button retained the ability to limit the transmission to a lower gear range through these alternate controls. And if your transmission is already showing signs of wear, delayed shifts, slipping, shuddering, this technique helps protect what remains, but it won't reverse damage that's already happened. It's a prevention protocol, not a repair. Here's the part that keeps sitting with me. There's something quietly strange about a decade of engineering where manufacturers built the protection mechanism directly into the vehicle, labeled it clearly, put the button within reach of the driver's hand, and then wrote documentation that said almost nothing about its most important everyday application. The Toyota engineers who designed the overdrive lockout understood heat. They understood clutch pack wear. They understood exactly what city traffic does to automatic transmission fluid over the course of a car's life. They designed an elegant, zero-cost solution and put it in the car. And then the owner's manual said, roughly, use this for towing or steep grades. And the knowledge of what it does for everyday city driving just didn't make it through. The fleet operators who ran those Toyotas past 400,000 miles on original transmissions weren't special. They didn't have access to exotic technology. They were following a set of internal protocols developed by people who understood the engineering intent behind the vehicle they were running. Use overdrive where overdrive works. Turn it off where it doesn't. Keep the fluid cool. Let the transmission do its job without forcing it to fight itself at every intersection in the city. That's it. That's the whole protocol. 2 button presses per drive, and your transmission stops cycling through unnecessary heat events for the rest of its life. And somewhere in the last 30 years, as the button became less common and the documentation became less complete, that knowledge just quietly sat on a shelf, while the $15 billion transmission repair industry kept growing. Not through malice, exactly. Just through the ordinary way that information gets lost when there's no financial incentive for anyone to keep sharing it. Knowledge like this doesn't disappear on its own, it gets buried. Sometimes under dealership recommendations. Sometimes under owner's manuals that tell you half the story. Sometimes just under the simple fact that nobody who profits from transmission repairs has any reason to explain why your transmission doesn't need to fail when it does. I don't know what brought you here. Maybe you've got a high-mileage automatic you're trying to keep alive. Maybe you just got something used and you're wondering how long the transmission's going to hold. Maybe you find it genuinely interesting that the answer was sitting on your gear shift the whole time. It doesn't matter. The button's there. Now you know what it's for. Subscribe if that matters to you. Take care and I'll see you in the next.